And this kind of segs into the next thing here, which some of the things that we're up against in fighting this. You know, we've already established it's going to take a lot more than street protests to fix this, and because there's a lot of other players involved besides the police. And Tim, you had kind of a question in regards to that, right?
Yeah, I was just curious as to if her group has ever had any pushback when trying to change certain laws or get some reform from either police unions or pro-police citizen groups.
Oh, no question. The police union was our biggest enemy around the police insurance amendment. And it's crazy because they shouldn't be enemies about it. It actually gives them a benefit they didn't have before. And so they should be quite happy about it. But part of the issue is that if you have a police insurance amendment, then the cops who are the worst of the bad actors will become uninsurable, and then they won't be able to be cops anymore. And so the Police Federation guy here, his name is Bob Kroll, he, frankly, because of his activities, would have become uninsurable, thus not being able to be the Police Federation president any longer. So we always said that he had a conflict of interest because he didn't want this to go through because it was going to affect him personally, but it would actually have been better for the regular officer in the street who isn't engaged in misconduct. So our whole thing was to try to make it so that these good, so-called good officers, and I don't really differentiate between good officers and bad officers, by the way. I always say it's a bad system because it allows the so-called bad officers to continue without being stopped. But nonetheless, if you want to use that terminology, the good officers would have had a better protection than the so-called bad officers. And as these officers who were engaged in the worst of the misconduct got weeded out, the better officers would be able to work in an environment where they didn't have to work with these clowns. They don't want to work in that environment. And so, he should have been in favor of it, but he wasn't. And it's real typical police unions to not be in favor of any kind of accountability structures. So we have always had to fight those guys. And a lot of the city council members are in league with them. People that try to stop you from doing things you need to do. And everything the cops want, they get. And anything the community wants, they try to stop it. So like when we were trying to get rid of the loitering and spitting, lurking ordinances because they were being used really pretty exclusively on homeless folks. And in Minneapolis, greater than 85% of homeless people are black. So it was really being used on black folks and very vulnerable black folks at that. And so when we were trying to get rid of that, there was all these city council members and they were saying things like, oh, but we need this as a tool for our officers. They need this as a tool. And that's the language you hear every time. It's always about a tool that the officers need. And they don't need those so-called tools. It's called discrimination. It's called civil rights violations. And they're not tools. They don't have any valid purpose, but they always use that language. So, yeah, we always have to go up against that stuff. You have to try to do some work behind the scenes to find the city council members that'll back you up and that'll help you. You have to do other things to try to help them be able to get some backing from other members of their council. We do a lot of research. We use a lot of statistics to validate the changes that need to happen. And Steve talked about that before. He said it's not the sexy work. Yeah, I love a good protest in the street. I'm down for it every time. But it is the unsexy work, but it's the work that gets things done. All of it's necessary because protests are about exposure and pressure. And that other work is about taking that exposure and pressure and taking it to the next level and getting the changes made that you need to make.
Right. The police unions, would you say that when people look at this issue, would you say that people, because I feel this is the case, would you say that people are underestimating the role police unions play in this and the power that they have?
There is no question about it. Here's a great example, and this happens all the time. We just had a guy here who was videotaped punching the lights out of a kid. A guy was just standing at the edge of the park, a Somali kid, and this was in Richfield, which is a sort of inner ring suburb of Minneapolis. And this kid was just standing at the edge of the park waiting for his ride. He was doing nothing wrong, broke no laws. The cops came, Richfield cops came, and they told the kid to get out of here. He says, I'm waiting for my ride. The cop just mowed this guy down, beating the crap out of him. He popped him. The guy fell. Then he starts pummeling the kid, and he's telling him, I said, we're working here. Get the beep out of here, and basically pummeled this kid. And this was all caught on videotape. There's no rationale for it. The kid's going to sue and all of this. The Richfield police chief fired this guy. He didn't like this conduct. He fired this guy. Well, they went to arbitration, and not only did they have to hire the guy back, but they had to give him back pay and all of this stuff. And the guy has no consequences for pummeling this kid, breaking his face and all this stuff. That was one. We had another situation where a cop, basically, he was going to a conference he was a dog handler cop, and he was going to a conference about dog handling and some kind of special certifications. He gets rip-roaring drunk. It's at a casino. He gets rip-roaring drunk at the casino. He's like molesting women in the casino, in the bar, the workers and other women, and they're complaining about him and saying, what's up? And this guy, he's on the taxpayer dime now, going to a work conference. He's rip-roaring drunk. He is doing all this other conduct and he's loud, he's obnoxious. And then when he leaves, he takes his dog, and the dog got caught like in this revolving door. And then he got mad because the dog couldn't get out quite that way. And he beats the crap out of the dog. All of this is on camera. He beats the crap out of his dog. And again, got fired for it and reinstated by the arbitrator. And the arbitrators are hired by these unions. They know who will put the guy back on the job. And this is part of it. And the other thing about these unions, now listen, we're not anti-union in our group. But right. Another thing about these unions is that these unions are not real unions. Unions, they do collective bargaining and things like that, but they represent line staff. These police federations represent people all the way up to the point of deputy chief, typically. So they're representing management as well, which should be considered a huge conflict. It's very weird. So we don't have any problem with whatever they negotiate for benefits and pay. We never care about that stuff. What we care about is the way that they negotiate into their contracts, the ability to avoid consequences for their conduct. And that is wrong, and that needs to end. It needs to change.
Could you elaborate on the arbiters? I've heard about arbitrators. I actually had a police chief tell me it's pointless to try and discipline officers because the arbitrators just come in and get it overturned. How do they do this? How do they pull this off?
Yeah, it has to do with the union contracts, and then in some cases state laws, and there are some state laws in Minnesota that contribute to this as well. But what happens is there's these little arbitration services, and by the way, they're paid very, very well. And there's these like certified arbitrators or whatever who listen to this stuff. And when a police officer gets in trouble for something, basically the main reason cops get in trouble is for internal complaints, things like, showing up to work late too many times, or, these kinds of things. And when those things happen, you understand why there's a need for a union and some representation of the worker and so forth and things like that. But it's when these cops engage in things that are actually illegal and that people have won large lawsuits over, they shouldn't be able to protect these people from that. But they do. And it has to do, again, with what's in the contract and what is in some of the state laws that allow the arbitrator to play that role. Because arbitration is not appealable. Whatever the decision of the arbitrator, there's no appeal. So what these unions have done is that because they're the ones paying all this money, these arbitrators, and the cities, and they, some of these cities secretly don't want these cops to be disciplined. They have to put on a good show and oh yes, I'm going to discipline this guy, knowing that it's going to be undone. So there's a bit of that as well. But basically, they hire arbitrators that they know are going to do the job for them by making sure there's no discipline. They know who they are.
But how do these arbitrators manage to accomplish that? I mean, there's certain ones that are able to do it, and they know who they are. They hire them. But what are the techniques these arbitrators use to pull this off?
They do a lot of things, like they try to bring in like all the good stuff this guy ever did in the past and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong. If, again, you're talking about things like the guy getting fired because he showed up to work late too many times or whatever, right? I don't really care about that kind of crap. I just don't. That's not what harms the community. I mean, it might be a ripoff or something, but it's not really what harms the community. It's in these situations where cops get involved in activities that really should be classified as criminal activities, because police brutality is a crime. Assaulting people, all this kind of stuff. These things are crimes. And because of the influence of the union on the ability to rig elections, basically, through their endorsements, judges who are the only union that can endorse a judge is the police union in Minnesota, and the
really
union, yeah. And so these judges are very married to the police union, and they will not allow prosecutions to happen. Prosecutors need cops. They're not going to prosecute cops. If they do, they're going to do what's happening in St. Paul around that Yanez prosecution in the Fondo Castile case. They're going to lowball the charges, and so they charged him with second degree murder or manslaughter, which means not planned, and not even engaging in conduct that could lead to somebody's death, but kind of almost like accidental death, which is bull. If you look at what he did and the actual scene, it should have been actually second-degree murder, not manslaughter. But basically, they charged him with second-degree manslaughter and then 2 felony assault charges. They'll get him on one of those felony assault charges, but they're never going to get him on manslaughter because A, they're not going to try hard enough to, and B, the judge will make sure that doesn't happen. So the whole system's rigged in that way to not treat a crime as a crime if you carry a badge. If you wear a badge and you wear blue clothes and that's your costume or whatever, you ain't going to go down on those charges because they're going to make sure you don't. And then the arbitrator plays that role as well.